Hi, I'm Warren Hewitt. I'm the CEO of the Greater Tygerberg Partnership, a not-for-profit company focusing on the regeneration of the Bellville area. This is the first of a series of conversations we're going to be having with high-profile individuals, political and business leaders, to find out why Bellville is such an important part of Cape Town's future. Our first guest in the series is Geordin Hill-Lewis, the Executive Mayor of Cape Town. Geordin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Very nice to be with you.
Tell me, it's been almost a year since you and your crew have been in charge and you've been in position. Tell us about some of the highlights and some of the challenges you faced in the last year.
It has been just over 10 months and an extraordinary 10 months it's been. I must say I've loved every minute of it. It's a fantastic job. It's the kind of job that gives you a real sense that you're doing something meaningful in society. It's an absolute honour and a privilege to be the Mayor of Cape Town. And I think in terms of some of the highlights, I've pushed really hard on our energy agenda, and I feel like we have made good progress and that we are on track to meet our goal of protecting the whole city from load shedding by the end of our first term. Of course, I'd always like to go much faster, and sometimes government, I'm still getting used to the wheels of government, they turn a bit more slowly than I'd like. But that certainly has been a highlight, and I think we're on track there. I've focused quite a lot on cleaning up the city, as I'm sure you've seen. And so I love the fact that so many hundreds of community organizations have come out to help. At last count, more than 200 private cleanups have been arranged by scouts groups and schools and sports clubs and just sometimes residents associations and so on, and that's lovely to see. That's exactly why we did this cleanup campaign, is to try and inspire that kind of civic activism, that's taking responsibility and pride in our city together. I think those are some of the highlights. Some of the challenges, as I said, I think I would really love things to move faster, and I really try to push as assertively and ambitiously as possible inside. But I must also say, this is probably a highlight as well, the team inside the city, our civil service here has just been superb. They've been super responsive to the priorities I've set, and they are really consummate professionals.
I think it's certainly no secret that you're very visible. You're a very visible manager, and I think your staff and your staff complement have stepped up in terms of visibility, certainly on the streets, and Bellville is no different. And we've seen a lot more activity from some of your senior officials and some of your senior politicians in that area. Is that going to continue?
Absolutely. That's very important to me. I mean, you really have to get a feel for what residents are experiencing from the city, and you can't get a feel of that from inside this office. You have to go and speak to people continuously, go and experience the city, and be a resident. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a resident of Cape Town myself. And so I want to focus a lot on what in business terms we would call the customer experience. And that's kind of management speak for what you do in the private sector. But we also need to focus on the customer experience. What is it that residents are experiencing from the city? Where do we need to pull up our socks? Where have we got to invest and focus time and attention? And so you really the only way you get a feel for that is by being on the shop floor, exactly as you would do it in the private sector. Any one of your businesses, Warren and Bellville, will know that you've got to be on the shop floor, feeling what your customers feel, getting the live feedback, and I believe in that very much.
Brilliant. Well, the feedback has been very, very positive, certainly from our constituents. Your predecessor launched the Bellville Future City Master Plan in March last year. It's a massive long-term project. I think there's a huge amount of airtime it's got. Public participation has gone through a process now. What are the current administration going to be doing in terms of supporting that master plan and paving the road for that development?
Warren, I think governments in South Africa have been really excellent at plans. And in general, government is excellent at what I call ideation. They're very good at new ideas. But the translation into practical programs and execution has really suffered and struggled. And so what I try to focus on, whether it be talking about that plan or anything that we talk about, load shedding or public transport, whatever it is, I try to focus on what are the practical action steps that can actually get us moving forward towards some forward momentum in that in delivering that. And so the phrase that I use here in the office is we've got to get some runs on the board, because it doesn't. If you've got a big total to chase in cricket, you can say, well, we've got to chase 500 or whatever. That it's impossible to do that. Or you can just start by getting some runs on the board, and then you build from there. And that's my approach. So, sorry for the cricket analogy. I hope the viewers are cricket fans. But so I really believe in getting runs on the board. So with regards to this plan for Bellville, it's just about picking out what are those practical projects that have to find their way into a budget somewhere. They have to get a budget allocation. They have to be planned. They have to be scoped. They have to be tendered in some cases, and to start getting those into the system. And so what we've done is we've looked at some of the biggest capital projects, most of them roads and transport infrastructure upgrades from the plan, and looked at how can we properly fund them, get them off paper and into a budget spreadsheet. That's step one. How do we get them properly scoped and planned, and then steer them through towards delivery in the years ahead.
In fact, I've sensed there's been a massive uptick from our perspective as to the publicity that Bellville's received as a result of the master plan launch. We're getting, my door's not being knocked over by investors, but I'm certainly getting a lot of inquiries from investors from within the city as well as from outside of the city, looking at Bellville now in a completely new light and seeing some momentum from the administration and certainly commitment towards a longer term vision.
Okay.
It's really, really important that you guys now start backing that up with these budget allocations in the coming years. And I think that's being earmarked. Is that right?
That's the difference between writing a really impressive plan on paper and actually making it real by putting runs on the board.
Reference to this planning, and there's been some senior officials and politicians commented around how many plans have been buried underneath the Bellville sort of civic. The conversion of a short-term initiative to start addressing some of the issues that are currently prevalent in the area.
Yes.
And in a recent survey we highlighted certainly safety is still one of those,
yes,
and service delivery is another. How are the administration going to have a look at addressing some of those in the shorter term?
Those two are absolute priority focus for us. Exactly those two, and not just for Bellville, by the way, but that survey result would apply in most parts of the city where you ask that question. Let's start with basic service delivery. Essentially what's happened in Cape Town is that we have fallen behind the infrastructure investment curve in our basic service categories. So it's a rapidly growing city in a urban developing world context, massive social challenges. So you've got to be constantly investing in infrastructure to keep up with those pressures. And we have invested in infrastructure, but I think we also have to put up our hand and say we have not invested fast enough to keep up with the growth in pressure on the system. And that is evident in the city. You can see that pressure on our water system, for example. You can see it on our sewer system. You can see it on our roads. Exacerbated, of course, by the collapse of the rail system. And so what we have to do now is make sure that we can really press down on the accelerator pedal on infrastructure investment, particularly in the key growth nodes of the city, which are, Bellville CBD, Claremont CBD, Sandown Road extension, and probably Somerset West area as well. There's 4 really rapid growth nodes of the city where you are right. It's people are really interested in investing there. How do we make sure that growth is supported by a growth in infrastructure that can cope with it and underpin it? Then on safety, we are making pretty significant investments, and I think very exciting investments in crime-fighting technology in the city over the coming years, starting this year actually. So not just more boots on the ground. This year, 230 new officers. It's probably the biggest head count or boot count expansion in a long time, but also things like aerial surveillance of the city, gunshot sensors, computer-aided dispatch, body cameras and dashboard cameras for all of our officers, 65 million this year in more CCTV, on top of what is already the biggest CCTV network in the country. So lots of tech investments in the safety space as well, to constantly look at how we can give our officers better intel on the ground, give them better resources to make them much more effective, so that you don't always have to keep adding more and more officers, but you can make each officer more and more effective. And finally, I'd say we've done this CBD law enforcement rollout here in this Cape Town CBD, and there was an alarming increase in not really violent crime, but robbery and crime in the CBD. We've acted quickly to address that. There's 2 other CBDs where I'd like to see similar rollouts in the months and years ahead, and that is Bellville CBD and Mitchell's Plain CBD. And I think that both of those CBDs would benefit from some focused additional law enforcement resources in the periods ahead.
Fantastic. I think safety has always been an issue, I think, as you've reiterated, and it largely goes around what we term petty crime because of the volume of people that are exactly transversing those areas, and certainly Bobby's on the beat, and technology plays a huge role in addressing that. On the investment side, how do you start unlocking budgets beyond just the city budget? Talking to provincial colleagues, national colleagues, and creating greater interest in investment in the area?
So the provincial colleagues have got quite a big investment pipeline of their own, mainly in roads and transport infrastructure, that we try to do some joint planning with them, and sometimes we see that there's a bit of a disjuncture between some roads investments and so on that we need to do better on coordinated planning. But interestingly, we've got some great support from National Treasury to fund big infrastructure projects. We're doing a huge public transport rollout of the My City bus, for example. That's entirely funded by something called the BFI, Budget Facility for Infrastructure, from National Treasury. We're actually making additional application for precinct infrastructure, basic water, sewer, stormwater infrastructure, to BFI again. And the indication is that we'll get the support we want. That's another couple billion. So there's actually some pretty good coordinated work going on in basic infrastructure. That's from the state side. But the interesting part of your question, I thought, was from the private side as well. You know, the work that we're doing now on electricity, I think, is a great example of what needs to happen much more in South Africa. We don't need to fund all of this investment on our balance sheet. The work that we're doing on electricity infrastructure now is entirely funded by the private sector. We just buy the power from them for a set fee for a set period of time. And that way they recoup their investment, and the prices are still cheaper than Eskom. So I think increasingly many more infrastructure projects need to be done in that way, so that you can do it off the government's balance sheet, and so that it can be delivered by the private sector, who I think has got a much better track record. I'm not sure anyone would argue with me on this. A better track record on delivering projects on time, reasonably on budget, getting it over the line.
Perfect. In fact, that prompts another question around private sector investment. You're aware of the Adam Tusk corridor development that's happening in Stellenbosch.
Yes.
Driven primarily by the private sector in
Yes.
collaboration with the municipality of Stellenbosch, but really as a supporting role in the development strategy and design. How do you feel that Bellville potentially could benefit from that kind of investment strategy led by the private sector?
So I'm aware of the Adam Tusk corridor from a broad overview perspective. I haven't seen it in a great deal of detail, so I can't comment in detail on it. But this idea of leveraging the assets that the municipality or the state has to encourage private sector development and investment, I'm 100% on that same page. We've got a program called our Accelerated Land Release Program, which is precisely designed for the intuition, or the insight rather, that the state cannot possibly deliver enough reasonably affordable, reasonably inclusive housing at the pace needed to keep up with demand in Cape Town. We can, at our very best, probably do about between 5,000 and 7,000 units a year. That is being delivered all the time in the private sector, probably multiples of that, without any state involvement. So imagine if we could offer assistance in the form of land unlock, or with our planning powers and so on, to actually leverage that kind of investment. I think that it could be potentially game-changing for our affordable housing crisis. And Bellville has an important role to play in that, because a lot of the densification happening in Bellville is in precisely the market that we need it to happen, and that is that more inclusionary, more affordable housing market, and that you've got reasonably good infrastructure, you're close to public transport. It is the perfect place for that kind of investment to happen.
Couldn't concur more, actually. I think affordable housing and that sector of the market around a transport-oriented development strategy plays a huge role. I think the public transport in its current form is in a state of flux, I'd assume, given the failure of rail and what's happened generally. What is the intention from the city side to start supplementing public transport infrastructure, specifically around that northern corridor?
So look, I would use slightly stronger language than a state of flux. I think the collapse of the rail system in South Africa is a national disaster. We have had a 98% reduction in rail usage over the last 6 years in South Africa, not just in Cape Town. Durban, Pretoria, Johannesburg, Cape Town, none of those 4 major metropolitans in this country have a functioning rail transport system. That is a major problem. You can't really run a functional, successful, flourishing city without, you just can't move millions of people fast enough. So we understand that it is going to be very difficult, very complex, technically involved, but we really believe that we have to devolve the management of the passenger rail system to the city. And I wish that we didn't have to do that, frankly. It's a big headache, you know. I wish that it would just work. Yeah, it would be much better if it worked, but I have zero confidence that it's going to work. So I'd rather just say, you know, let us do it. And that's going to take some time. We've just started our feasibility project. We are pushing quite hard to set up a technical task team to work on rail devolution. And in the meantime, while that's all happening, and we'll push on that, we are, as I've said earlier, rolling out a very big expansion of the My City project. Of course, that doesn't link in with Bellville, and I really do think that the next phase of My City needs to be that link from, you know, around the back of the city, from essentially from Khayelitsha to Bellville, and hopefully, if we can get the rail sorted out in the coming years, we can start to re-establish those essential links, and that will only be a boon for Bellville.
In fact, it's probably a question we receive very often in terms of the My City rollout, and as to when the northern suburbs are going to be connected. And I know there are conversations that are happening specifically around road infrastructure and the expansion of road infrastructure to accommodate how the city's expanded. Which brings me to one other question, which seems intriguing in terms of provincial government's spend, is the R300. And the R300 extension, which is a massive capital project, and earmarked to really alleviate some of the congestion coming from the far north. Yet, does it stand in contradiction with the city's MSCF? Does it not change it?
I don't think so. Although I must be honest with you, I would prefer for the R300 to be extended on the other side, and I've made that point. But both are going to happen. It's just a question of which happens first, and the province is quite set on doing the northwestern extension first. I don't think that it's bad for the city, though. I mean, that is a really fast-growing node. That far north, there's huge residential investment there. The rural area around Lucullus Road, for example, is clearly an area of future development, and so I have no doubt that the city can cope with that extra capacity in the future. Of course, there is a risk that, as we know from around the world, more highways just means more people on those highways, and making it more attractive to use them. So over the medium term, hopefully, we have to have a functioning rail system. It goes back to rail. But in the absence of that, it's really difficult to make a case against expanding road networks or other less passenger-intensive forms of public transport, because there is just no alternative. You have to work on building that alternative in the rail space, which is what we're doing.
Okay. Look, I think it's going to be contentious, and we could spend all morning discussing the R300 and its values. In our opinion, we believe that it's adding value to the wrong sector of the market, and we're driving development out towards the sort of boundaries of the city, where we should be looking at inwardly focused regeneration projects, which specifically Bellville supports. And that kind of capital would be far better spent on a public transport interchange servicing a larger portion of our population. But be that as it may, I think it's going to be discussed at length over a period of time.
No doubt, yeah.
Going back to the Bellville situation again, out of that same survey where we highlighted safety and service delivery, the two aspects that came out very positively was affordability and accessibility. For Bellville to really be a supporting secondary node for the city of Cape Town, and the fact that it is so affordable, and we're seeing migration coming from around the country, but also movements within the city boundaries towards this northern area. How do you see Bellville playing out in the future?
I think it's got a very bright future. I mean, it is a kind of secondary city inside the city. It is an enormous industrial and economic hub. I'm not sure what the stat, you probably have this at your fingertips compared to the CBD, but it's got to be pretty close in terms of industrial and commercial activity to the CBD. So if whatever happens in Cape Town's future, Bellville is going to be right at the heart of it. And as someone who's grown up in the north of the city, it'll continue to be, I think, a really important part of home and work and education and recreation for hundreds of thousands of Cape Townians, if not millions of Cape Townians in the years ahead. And indeed, as the city expands to the north, northwest and northeast, I think many more of those people will see Bellville as their natural kind of heart of the city rather than anywhere else. So I see no problems for Bellville in the future. The question is the pressure, managing the pressure of that growth and keeping ahead of that curve so that growth can be underpinned and supported properly, and so that you don't start to see the kind of collapse of systems that you see in other city CBDs around the country. We can never ever allow that to happen, because history shows us, and those other examples show us in South Africa and around the world, that once that happens, it's much, much harder to reverse. So what we have to do is make sure that we stay ahead of, and I feel that pressure very much, and we really want to make sure that we get that infrastructure done ahead of time to support that growth.
I'm going to go back one more step to the private investment, and specifically development investment. And I know a lot of our viewers will be asking the question, when doing applications around development opportunities, they're finding a huge backlog. And it would be remiss of me not to ask you as the boss, how do we start alleviating and streamlining that process, development process, to allow them a far bigger return in areas that we want them to develop in?
Yeah, we want to try and, essentially it's all about lowering the holding costs.
Yeah.
And we're busy now. We've just started a rewrite of our municipal planning bylaw, and I'm very aware of the fact that it is such a giant bylaw that you really get one chance to do this in your term of office, so we have to get it right. So I'm not going to rush it, but I'm also very keen to get proper feedback from the development community to tell us what are the things that cause the greatest delay in the process, and what are the things that we need to really simplify. So I think that rewrite is going to be the centerpiece of fixing the problem you've correctly identified, by the way. You're right to identify it. It does take too long. Holding costs are too high, and that makes more and more projects marginal, which means fewer projects are actually done. And so it has to be addressed. I think the best way to do it is a proper rewrite of the system. That needs to be done quite cautiously, because a lot of the system works well, obviously. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we do need the intel on what are the pressure points, what are the things that really frustrate investors, and how do we find ways around that or ways to correct that.
Second, lastly, the role of public-private partnerships, and I'm not referring only to the GTP. We are a partner of the cities, although we're a private company, but there are others in a similar role, where we play a stakeholder relationship between key role players, just the private sector on the one hand, the tertiary education systems on the other hand, and the major universities in the area. How do you see those kind of relationships, organisations such as the GTP and the role that they have going forward?
By and large, I see them as really value adding. It does come down to the kind of management that is in those organizations. Are they go-getters? Are they really activists? Or do they just see it as a kind of comfortable sinecure? So there's a risk of that happening. But in general, in Cape Town, my experience with this has been that we have people who are in the sector, in the SPV, for a dedicated reason. They genuinely care about what's trying to be done. They put their very best into it, and it works really well. So I'm very, very supportive of that. The other thing is you get less formal types of public-private partnerships. The great, fantastic work that SIDS do, for example. Even, frankly, the fantastic works that neighbourhood watchers and ratepayers associations do. There's just a lot of dedicated, roll-up-your-sleeves kind of Cape Townians who want to make the city an even better place. And we genuinely see them as partners. Partnership means both ways. It's not just us telling them what to do. It has to be both ways, and so we appreciate that honest feedback loop as well.
Perfect. Geordin, on a last note, you have a massively heavy schedule.
Yes.
You're a family man, you're married, you've got a young daughter.
Yes.
How do you balance your life between what is a huge commitment to the people of Cape Town as well as your family commitment? How does that work?
That is a good question. That is, it's a work in progress. It is a really important part of it's the most important part of my life is my family. And I have to be quite disciplined about trying to carve out time and reserve time for them, to spend time with them, to go to sports games and choir recitals. In fact, this morning I just came from a choir recital this morning. So I think I'm by and large getting it okay, but probably not great. And that's part of the challenge is getting that balance right. I have a couple of basic disciplines. We try to spend some time in the bush once a year, because I really love that and love going to the Kruger Park. It's a very special place for our family. And I take my daughter to school every single morning. So that time in the car together is very special because, as you well know, Warren, this kind of role includes lots of evening gigs, evening functions. So I'm very often not home in the evening. So I try to be very disciplined about that morning routine, and then where I can on weekends.
You're very accessible. How do our viewers get in contact with you if they want to reach you? What is the process? Is there something that we can put out that makes them, they're really feeling a lot closer to your office? How do they get in contact with you?
I also have to try and strike a balance between being accessible and giving residents the sense that they can get feedback to me, and not having an open door to 4.5 million people, because then I'll never get anything else done. So I have a dedicated team here in the office that manages our inbox, and they escalate anything that they think needs my personal attention to me. And I really do like to look through some of the letters and some of the emails that come in. So anyone can email us on mayor.mayor@capetown.gov.za, and our team will get it here. They can send invitations through to that same email address and so on. Then, besides that, I probably do about 2 public town hall style meetings a week in Cape Town. Last night in Durbanville, actually, and the week before that in Noordhoek and Kraaifontein. And so we move around the city all the time. And those have been actually really wonderfully well attended. I'm really appreciative of that. So there's lots of public engagements that I'm available at. I'm obviously on social media, and I try to answer people's complaints and concerns on social media. So I do try to be accessible, but also try to balance that with focusing on the strategic work that we've got to get done here.
Well, from our side, you're doing a fantastic job, and we really appreciate the time that you've given to some of our functions, some of our area, and certainly the constituents in Bellville, Durbanville, Parow, Goodwood. Any last message for our viewers?
Well, I try to be very deliberate and thoughtful with my time, Warren, and the reason that I have been responsive to your requests and have attended your functions is because I genuinely value very highly the work that you do at GTP and the effect that you're having on the city and the positive contribution that you make. And I can assure you that the requests that you've made and the ones that you will make in the future, I will always warmly support and try to be as supportive and present as possible, because it is one of the ways that I can show my gratitude and give impetus and momentum to the work that you are doing. So thank you very much for what you do for Cape Town.
Thank you, Geordin. I really appreciate your time, especially in your heavy schedule. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That's the first in our series of Bellville Conversations, where we're going to be talking to high-profile politicians, business leaders, and community members, talking around why Bellville is so important for the city of Cape Town. We look forward to catching you at our next event. Thank you.